Right. Yes, so thanks for the first panel, Catherine and the team that you have had here. We have had very inspiring words from prominent leaders, but we also have not future leaders, but leaders of today, because they are already doing something about it. They're already leading movements, they're already doing actions that are actually needed to see that we can have climate education in all communities and everyone really activated. My name is Derek Mugisha, and I'm from Uganda. I work with earthday.org as a regional director, Africa. When we look at climate education, we looked at all NDCs that were submitted by countries, and no country had a plan on something to do with climate education. And today I'm joined by really inspiring speakers that are here in front of you. Have Ismail Farja, who's the coordinator of the African Youth Climate Hub. He's there. We have Naomi, Nyamweya, who's a research officer at Malala Fund. We have Kazi from the Bangladeshi youth representative and the World Organization of Scout Movement. Thank you very much for joining. But first, we also have one online, Donna Goodman, founding director, Earthchild Institute. We shall see the video first, and then I'll introduce panelists later as well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Donna Goodman. I am the founding director of Earthchild Institute, an international NGO that's based at the UN in New York and working in Brazil, Ghana, Cameroon, and many other places in the world with young people empowering children to take action. I'm really sorry I couldn't be there with you today in person, but so thrilled to be able to deliver this video message to you. I think the importance of mainstreaming climate change in education, in educational systems all over the world is essential, it's crucial. And the days of talking about climate change through mitigation and science of what climate change is solely are now past. With the increasing prevalence and severity of natural disasters all around the world already happening, we need to empower our children to take action now. They need to learn about adaptation, how to prepare their water for safe drinking, what to eat outside if they're stuck in a situation, what is edible, what is not edible, how to plant trees to grow food in their neighborhoods. This is the priority of what I've done through my career, what Earthchild Institute is focused on, and my work today, which is switched to fiction, fact-based fiction, in a book series called Eco Masters, A Planet in Peril. The first book was The Pathfinder, and the second book, which is launching soon, is called The Phoenix, Eco Masters, Ice and Fire. And the reason why I've switched to fiction and mainstream media is because there are 2.2 billion children on Earth today under the age of 18. And I believe that we need a mass media approach to engage and empower them as quickly as possible. The Eco Masters are all 13 years old. They start in the US and New York to Malawi, Laos, India, and in the Amazon River Basin in Brazil in the first book alone. And they're all 13-year-old girl-led, water-powered, water magic adventures in addressing climate change. In fact, as I was writing book 2, with the glaciers melting and overflowing the Ganges River in India, it actually happened in February, just as I was writing the manuscript. The time is now. We must take action now. And I urge all of you in Glasgow to urge also all decision makers, policy makers, to work toward mainstreaming education for children in primary, secondary, and beyond immediately, if not sooner, to allocate the funds, to make this possible. And I thank you so much. Have a wonderful COP, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Donna Goodman. The time is now, and on my far left, we have Ismail. Ismail, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and the amazing work that you're doing in your community?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Ismail Farja, Junior Executive Manager at the Mohammed VI Foundation for Environmental Protection and coordinator of the African Youth Climate Hub. The African Youth Climate Hub is a platform of incubation, capacity building, networking, and connecting young people with different stakeholders and connecting young people with each other. Currently, we are in our first edition of our incubation program, and we have also just launched our first e-learning module on climate change in Africa that is available online on youthclimatehub.org. So you just need to go online, log in, and then enjoy the different functionalities of the platform.
Yeah, I'll then go to Kazi. You can also do the same and introduce yourself for amazing work.
I'm Kazi from Bangladesh. I currently serving as a youth representative of the World Organization of the Scout Movement. As you might know, Scouting is one of the largest non-formal educational youth movement in the world, with almost 57 million young people, around 170 countries in this world. So we have a very big population of young people in our organization as members. And we are doing so many things in our movement with environment, especially with the non-formal environmental education. So I am hoping to put some light on the non-formal environmental education in this panel discussion. So we are here almost 10 members from 10 different countries representing the Scout delegation to COP26. And we're representing the high hopes of 57 million young people in our movement, and looking forward that the world leaders will take concrete action to tackle climate change and these things. Let's see how our hopes hold. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to my right, and Naomi, you can also introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Naomi Nyamweya, and I am the research officer at Malala Fund. Malala Fund is a girls' education organization, and what we do is we work to create a world where every girl has the opportunity to choose her own future, a world where every girl can learn, and a world where every girl can lead. We've recently explored the nexus between girls' education and climate, recognizing the fact that educated girls can create a more climate resilient world, but climate change, as is happening now, is stopping multiple girls from accessing their education. And I'm really excited for this conversation that we're going to have.
Yeah, now talking about failing to have access to the education, the quality education they'll need, but also the civic kind of education that really can communicate climate solution as well, because our panel discusses innovative climate education solutions and practices for youth empowerment. I'll ask you quickly, like, what are those challenges and where are we failing in terms of implementing climate education?
I think that climate education is a thing that a lot of people are talking about recently. Like, currently it's a hot topic, but I think that there's issues in the curriculum as is right now. So I think we need to have CCE and ESD that is more localized, that ties things that are happening in learners' real lives to the changing climate. So for example, if there's a flood in a community, if there's a drought, if there are increased swarms of mosquitoes, educators should be able to tie that to climate change so that learners are able to have that personal connection. And there's actually a study that shows the long-term impact of an education that ties climate change to people's real lives. And it shows that even after 5 years, learners that were given such education and that were given the opportunity to implement change within their community still exhibited climate-smart behavior. So they were able to, for example, pick energy providers that were sustainable, pick sustainable forms of transportation. But even then, such an education ties climate change solutions to personal responsibility. And all of us here know that it's not a single person or personal responsibility that is the key to stopping the world from warming as is. And what what we need is to also promote values such as activism, so that learners are able to interrogate the root causes of climate change, such as capitalism and unsustainable economic growth. And through this interrogation, they're spurred into the kind of action to hold their leaders to account, because they're the ones that actually hold the keys to reversing the climate catastrophe that we are currently seeing.
Yeah, young people holding the keys and being the future leaders, but also me personally, I call them the now leaders, because amazing young people out there are doing tremendous work and they are really inspiring their communities. I'll turn to Ismail and ask you, how can we transfer this kind of learning that Naomi tries to tell us that can really transform our communities into action within our communities? Because we know there are so many young people who are in their communities who do not know anything about the climate crisis. I know now where my country in Uganda, there's a young person who has been inspired to go and cut down a forest because they believe they'll get some money out of it, or they're just doing it for someone who's benefiting from their future. So what do you think are ways in which we can transfer this kind of learning, where we can educate them, empower them, give them the knowledge, the values, like one of the young leaders mentioned, because we need the values if we're going to be transformative leaders into action?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the main element that needs to be taken in consideration is not only young people know and are able to identify their needs when it comes to understanding climate change and being able to address it and promote sustainable development, but they also have a sort of expertise that they could provide. So, and I think, from my perspective, that we need to invest in those aspects. Sometimes we have young people that have innovative ideas and that actually hold actions that do address and are solutions for the climate crisis, yet they don't have the appropriate tools to either scale up their projects or scale up their ideas or concretize their ideas in order to better address the climate problem. That's why I think first thing that we need to do is we need to shift our understanding and our way of thinking about climate education. I think so far mainly we are more traditionally targeted about climate change as problems rather than targeting climate change as opportunities. I think it's very important to take in consideration that young people need to understand the problems that are related to the impact of climate change, but they also need to acquire the tools to be able to identify the opportunities that they could seize in order to better address climate change. And this happens through a multidisciplinary approach. If we go through, for example, an education system that gives tools to these young people to address climate change through psychology, for example, through finance, for example, through different thematics, I think we would be able to build the minds of our young people to have a solutions-oriented minded rather than problem-oriented minded. And I think the actors that could implement these aspects are mainly through youth networks that are actually active in some regions and do actually have some antennas over the world where they could actually implement those kind of knowledge products and share them with the communities there. So maybe give much importance to these networks that are led by young people and that are being able to mobilize actors, mobilize stakeholders, being able to go reach to knowledge products present in different institutions, capitalize on that, bring knowledge together and then share it and spread it through the different communities. I think the way, if we invest in those networks that are actually built by young people and actually co-constructed by young people, it will be easier to make this information and reliable information reach those individuals.
Yeah, something that I've really liked from your conversation, mobilizing stakeholders, but also taking back the information back to our communities, because at times even the experts or people, they communicate but at a certain level, but we still know there's a big educational gap that happens. And because again, we have had the pandemic hit most of these schools, but also our leaders did not have a plan before on how we are really educating about the climate crisis. And I think this is how far it has brought us, that at least level, even a young girl or a young boy can't go to school because of all the issues that happen in their community, the flooding, with the heat waves. Because again, you can't concentrate in class, even if it's there, when you have no food. When anytime you can't even concentrate when it's too hot in that room. And here I'll bring in Kazi. What are those practices or solutions you think leaders, world leaders, all community leaders, parliament, talk about activists, talk about civil society, talk about everybody that we can use to kind of build this value-based knowledge, the skills that that we need, and also the practices that we shall give to these young people to see that they can thrive, but also trying to adapt and mitigate this climate crisis.
Thank you for the question. As we are talking about the climate education, it actually relates to the environmental education, right? It's a subdomain of the environmental education. So to answer your question, I want to specifically concentrate on the dimension from I come from. The Scout movement actually working with the non-formal environmental education. And non-formal environmental education is any kind of environmental education that helps young people to learn about environment outside the classroom setup. And also take action in their community, like whatever problems, environmental problems they are having, and how they can take action. This is also the thing we are helping our young people to learn from inside the movement. This is a thing that from using the non-formal education, non-formal environmental education, you can support the formal environmental education to make your young people climate literate or environmental literate, whatever you want to say. From our experience as one of the non-formal educational youth movement, we have seen that non-formal education, non-formal environmental education helps young people to take actions by learning things, by doing things, like it's experiential education. Like you are learning things and you are getting the chance to apply those things in your community. Like I'm learning there is a problem, climate change is a problem, and the bad effects of climate change, what is the bad effects of climate change in my community? If I learn about that, then I can also use my knowledge to take climate action to address those problems in my community. So we are progressing with the learning by doing system to empowering our young people so that they can also take action alongside learning different things of the environment. That's also important because we cannot tackle all the problems happening in our society regarding the environment by learning them theoretically in the classrooms. So there is a dire need of activism and things to do outside the classroom. So we can address all those problems that we are facing on daily basis in our society. So this is the thing I can share from my experience and from my organization, that non-formal environmental education is there to support the formal environmental education, and it can also reach the people who are not in the setup of any formal education. Like you were saying, in Uganda there are young people who are not in the formal educational setup. So how you can reach them? Of course, you will have to use non-formal environmental education to reach them and inspire them to take environmental actions, also increasing the rate of climate literacy among the people who are not in the classrooms or any kind of educational institutes. So this is the thing on non-formal environmental education from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Something I've learned is that once you give them the tools that they need, actually you'll see so many innovations. I've interacted with young people 10 years, 12 years who are doing tremendous work. And I'm like, why don't countries make this mandatory or make it compulsory across all levels, or trying to see that we all have access to very quality education whereby we are all activated? I'm sure there could be even millions of actions that these young people, once given the tools and the skills that you're sharing, they could bring out, and maybe those are the solutions that the world needs at this moment. But they're not being given a chance because initially leaders are maybe sleeping or doing something else, or they don't see education as really a priority. But I'll turn to Naomi because I think your organization has been on the lead of trying to see that every girl has access to school, but also in this context, we need to have as many young people back in school. And so what kind of solutions could you suggest that you think we need at this point? Because I would say we have failed over years. SCE negotiations are not doing any progress. We feel like leaders do not take education as a priority. So what do you suggest?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Like, what do you suggest as solutions to see that we can be able to educate the young people, or the mechanisms of making sure that all the solutions that are being suggested by the other panelists really work?
Yeah, so when it comes to getting girls into school and what works to get girls into school, or what works to get learners into school, I think that the biggest barrier is a lack of financing. And so we need to fund education systems, so first to be resilient against climate change and against other disasters, like what we saw with COVID-19 and the school closures, and learners weren't able to go into school, and so there's the need for like distance learning, but just financing education systems for them to be resilient. But then we also need to subsidize families. So families that are very low income or who are tight for cash have to pick between a meal or sending a child to school. And so if there are subsidies for these families, either by providing school uniform or by school feeding programs or even direct cash transfers, then families have, and these cash transfers that are linked to sending their children to school, then these families are able to send their children to school because they have the fiscal space to do so. I think that it's also, we need government ministers, and there's going to be a ministerial summit. We need them to include education in their national determined contributions. We need them to see education as a tool that can be used to fight climate change. And we need this, again, to be backed with financing, so that it's not just something that we're harping on about or that we're saying is a good thing, but it's also something that's actioned, that's backed by finance.
Yeah, because I think when you look at some countries, education is given really a small budget, and I don't think they really understand the importance of educating everybody. And when all these young people are really educated, and they can be able to make the informed decisions, but also leaders also need to have this information as well. And I'll turn to Ismail and ask, because I've seen you nurture young voices. I've seen you give them the tools. I've seen you give them the knowledge, give them the skills. How can climate education nurture these kind of solutions for them to be, like the young people, to be solution-oriented, but also have those kind of minds? So how can climate education really nurture those solutions?
Well, that's pretty much our objective within the African Youth Climate Hub, is if you give the young people a new approach of addressing a topic, you will just open a door to a multitude of potential solutions that could be just mind-blowing. I think we launched the incubation program. We just went for a small amount of time, and we received like more than 218 projects, African projects. And when you just go through those projects, you just realize that young people could, from small projects, small ideas that they have, that they just either had while they had an experience in their community, or while they've been digging into their values or into their culture, they found solutions to addressing climate change. So what we try to do, more specifically when it comes to the African Youth Climate Hub, in the capacity building process within the incubation program, for example, or the e-learning that we're having, is we try to give the necessary elements for young people to have an entrepreneurial mind, and also give them a sort of learning process that brings up concepts with concrete examples. So what we try to do is, as soon as you're able to explain the concepts when related to climate change with concrete examples, it just clicks, and then you have young people just automatically having this more solution-oriented approach, because they see that this example replies to this specific concept when it comes to climate change. Then you see to what extent it goes, and they start finding solutions by themselves. One thing that is very interesting is that we had a workshop during the 16th Conference of Youth, and we just came up with a game where we just set up a village that has certain problems, and we gave two groups. One group, we gave them sort of variables where they have a lot of information about the village and about the climate change impact on that village and everything, and the other group just has no information at all, and they just has scarce information. And what we realized is that the group that has a lot of information, it goes beyond the problem. They just don't seek to answer the problem only, but they just start questioning every single thing, every other thing. They start questioning the process of decision-making. They start questioning what is the format of decision-making. They start also questioning to what extent we could even dig further in terms of solutions for a long-term period. Whereas the ones that don't have enough information, they stick to a short-term solutions, but they don't see further how they could have a more sustainable approach. So our idea is to basically give as much information as possible through aggregating all the actors and all stakeholders that are present and being able to share information and to share data mainly, and that's also what we're trying to do to the different components of the African Youth Climate Hub, is being able to have data on climate change and allow those young people to access those information, but not only access them, but also them be providers of information. And that's the point where I think the co-construction of knowledge and of things is very important. Is if you bring young people in the process of making things, first of all, it will go very, very quickly. And second of all, they will formulate themselves the appropriate process for them to address their problematics and be able to address climate change and promote sustainable development.
Yeah, so meaning climate education is actually a long-term solution. And I think this is where leaders have to act very urgently and give it that kind of priority it deserves. If they're thinking long-term, if they're with us to move to net zero as well, and seeing that communities are really resilient. And for that, I was thinking, okay, I think I'll address this to Kazi. How do we connect what's happening local and the global environment in the classroom?
I will relate this with non-formal education again, because we do things outside of the classroom. But the situation is almost similar, whether it is inside the classroom or outside the classroom. In our movement, we use non-formal education to funnel down the knowledge from the global level to the national levels organizations, like we have 172 national level organizations. And we have some flagship environmental programs partnered with WWF and IUCN, and there is UNEP. These organizations, with these organizations, we have some flagship programs like UpTribe and several other things you will find on the Google. Those things actually uses the global knowledge and inspires the young people to use that knowledge to take action in their local level. So that they are getting the knowledge, but they are getting global knowledge, but they are using that knowledge to solving the climate problems or environmental problems, whatever we say, at the local level. I can share a little story on that. Like 7 years ago, we started a flagship program of Scouts, which is called the Messengers of Peace. And under that program, you can take so many service projects, which we actually, in other organizations, you say projects, we say that service projects. You can take the service projects and just register what you are doing and how much time you have invested in that project in our scout.org website. And it's very surprising that in last 7 years, we have logged around 2.5 billion service hours. It means Scouts, young people from around the world has logged around 2.5 billion service hours, serving the local community, society, addressing all kinds of environmental issues at the local level. So at the end, I want to say that if the young people are given proper opportunity to connect the global thinking with the local solutions, then they can act very well. And I think in coming days, this thing will further furnished, and young people will be able to get connected with the global level knowledge more. Like Ismail was saying, they are using e-learning methods. We are also using e-learning methods in our movement. And it's very, very good to see that young people are taking actions from their side whenever they are given opportunities. So it's the responsibility for the COP party stakeholders like countries and governments to take up the proper measure to give them the opportunity to get them involved with the solution in their community on climate change related issues. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Kazi. You know, when you're speaking, I'm really this much excited. And I think now we know there are young people that are really doing these actions. And like, I'll turn to Naomi for this. What do you think the young children can do in their communities and also globally to try to adapt to these challenges? Because we have seen from our elders, they've really done a lot of inaction. And each time they refuse to do the action, the cost of inaction triples. It continued to double each and every day, each and every month, each and every hour, and each and every second. So what do you think the children can do and the young people in general in their communities?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So what I believe is that children are not responsible for the climate crisis. They didn't cause the climate crisis. And so the burden of undoing the damage that's been caused should not lie on them. And the burden of adapting should not lie on them. I mean, it's quite unfortunate that given the world as is and given the scenario that we are in right now, they have to adapt. But that particular burden, that particular responsibility does not belong to children. But I believe that through climate education that teaches expanded STEM skills such as like adaptability, creativity, negotiation, critical thinking, this type of climate education would allow children to have critical inquiry. And this, as I mentioned earlier, would enable them to interrogate the root causes and would help them hold their leaders to account. The leaders who are responsible for stopping this climate crisis, the leaders who are responsible for funding adaptation. So children might do whatever it is that they can do in their communities. They might, for example, if there's flooding, they might, if there's flooding and farming can't happen, then they might have like farms, they might have aqua farms. If there's like an agricultural lesson and they can learn about like drought-resistant crops, that's something that they would be able to share with farmers within their communities. But I think that the biggest tool that young people have is their activism, which would hold leaders to account because it is their responsibility. It's not the children's responsibility.
It's not the children's responsibility. It is, I guess, the government's responsibility, and you have so many parties represented to that COP, and they need to act. Like, this is not something we just have to keep saying. This is something that they should be doing, and like we have heard from the panelists, climate education is actually a long-term solution, and if backed up with the very appropriate financing, which they should do actually, we should see so many solutions that you have all suggested from the young people, but also scale them up and, you know, let them hit the market. I'm one of the person who believes there are so many green jobs as well. Like, it's an opportunity for job creation as well. I think, like Ismail said, we should see this as an opportunity for young people because once we can bridge all these gaps that are there and all these loopholes and bridge all these gaps, we shall see so many great jobs. We shall see resilient communities that is really supported by young people, by everyone, by governments. But just to, you know, to close this kind of discussion, and I'll just give each one of you a chance to give your parting shots and maybe tell us what you think drives youth to act. We shall start from Ismail.
Okay. Well, from my humble perspective, I believe there are three interlinked elements that drive youth to action. First of all, experience. Young people experience things, they live things, they get knowledgeable about things, which leads them to be passionate about things. So when they become passionate about things, they hate status quo. And I think these three elements, when we have experience, when we have passion and status quo, young people always act. And young people don't like remaining in the same status while knowing there are inequalities, while knowing that there are concrete impacts on their environment. So these are the three elements from my perspective that I believe that push young people to act. And when you have these three elements combined, I don't think that there is anything possible that could stop young people from achieving their objectives.
Yeah, Kazi as well. What do you think?
Yeah, for young people from climate change perspective, so the bad things happening from the climate change are mostly faced by the young people, and in the coming days, if the those promises by the world leaders are not actually fulfilled in future, then the young people will be the most vulnerable group to face those things. From my experience, I can say young people are experiencing this thing and they are very keen to take action because they are going through that experience. And their experience is driving them to take action to mitigate or adaptation of climate change. But it's very sad to say that the parties or countries or governments, whatever we want to say, they are not that much interested to help young people to go through this. But we all need to think that the young people, the younger generation, the generation to come, they are the one, they will face the most bad impacts of the climate change in coming decades. So as the elder generation, they cannot just deny what is going to happen in future. So they have the responsibility to help younger generation to get prepared for those challenges. So that's it from my side.
Thank you. We shall turn to Naomi as well.
So I think I would echo what my fellow panelists have said. It's that intimate experience of climate change. They have the knowledge because they have the lived experience and they've seen it. But also when there's a democratic approach to teaching, when learners are able to have debate within their classrooms, when there's civic engagement in the classrooms, when they're able to think of different solutions, when the classroom provides a space for them to recognize that the solutions to climate change are not only technocratic, that they're also political, then this also spurs them to action because they're able to form like a mass. They come together as a group and they're able to perform activism together because in the classroom they've had a participatory and democratic approach to learning. And I think that this drives them into action.
I want to thank all of you. You have really touched my heart with inspiring messages you have sent out this afternoon, but also the inspiring solutions that you've given out and you've shared. We know this is a struggle that we are all in, and together we can. This is something we need to have. We should have hope that if climate education and youth empowerment is taken priority in all countries, that we shall in the near future, because we are saying leave no one behind. And if we are leaving young people behind because of their failing to access quality education, but also civic education that can enable them to act on these kind of issues, then we shall not have done anything. So I want to thank you, all of you, and I want to thank the audience for joining our panel, and thank you very much.